Dear students, I welcome you all to this lecture on decentralization in South Asia, peace building and economic development. The main aim of this lecture is to understand the role played by decentralization in building peace, ensuring people's participation at the local level, and in service delivery. Decentralization as a peace building and state building strategy has been used in a number of post-conflict states such as Colombia, Sri Lanka, Sierra Leone, Northern Ireland, Rwanda, etc. Donor agencies, especially the World Bank, have increasingly come to consider that decentralization and democratic local governance should be priorities in peace-building processes. Potential advantages of decentralization as a peace-building strategy are seen in both democratic and developmental terms, all of which mitigate the likelihood of conflict. These include greater political participation and improving democratic accountability, promoting social inclusion, which has been a major factor in the outbreak of conflict, and efficient local service delivery. Decades of research have shown that decentralization both improves and worsens all of these outcomes in different countries at different times, leaving us unable to draw broader conclusions. Empirical evidence of the effectiveness of decentralization is mixed. Indeed, the experience of decentralization in post-conflict peace building suggests that a more nuanced understanding is necessary to understand better how and when it may reduce or exacerbate conflict. In this lecture, I will discuss the concept and dimensions of decentralization. Following this, I will deliberate upon the background of decentralization in South Asia. Finally, and most importantly, I will explain the working of decentralization strategy in the conflict-ridden erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. Focusing on panchayats, this lecture situates the working of decentralization within the protracted conflict situation and explores the outcomes related to local community participation and specifically to the issues related to the devolution of funds and taxation powers. It's argued that the decentralization strategy in the erstwhile state is largely driven by political motivation, and the institution of panchayats has failed to act as instruments of change and development. Dear students, let me explain first the concept of decentralization. According to Rajshekhar, decentralization is a process that transfers political, administrative and physical responsibilities to local elected bodies and empowers communities to ensure that these bodies function effectively. Economic advantages of decentralization are seen in both the limited geographic extent of the benefits of public goods and the relatively high cost of decision making if everything is centralized. Decentralization is a multi-dimensional concept as it covers three distinct but interrelated dimensions: political, administrative and physical. Political decentralization aims to give more authority to citizens and their elective representatives in decision making and public administration. Political decentralization can also mean a set of constitutional amendments and electoral reforms designed to open new spaces for the representation of subnational policies. Political decentralization is a system of government in which there is a vertical division of power among multiple levels of government that each has independent decision-making power. Administrative decentralization seeks to redistribute authority, responsibility and financial resources for providing public services between different levels of government. It is the transfer of responsibilities for planning, financing and managing certain public functions from the central government to subordinate units or levels of government, semi-autonomous public authorities or regional or functional authorities. Fiscal decentralization refers to a series of policies designed to increase the financial autonomy of subnational governments. In a physically decentralized system, more effective and productive use is possible when resources are provided by local actors and the costs and benefits of goods and services provided by local governments are limited to the region in question. Arguments in the favor of decentralization claim that it can enable efficient allocation of services, empower marginalized and weaker groups, and ensure higher economic growth. Decentralization reforms are and have been implemented for a wide variety of political, historical, and economic reasons that vary greatly across countries. Several moves towards decentralization have been mainly motivated by the quest for more local democratic control as well as by greater efficiency in public service delivery and accountability for regional and local development policies. According to Pranab Bardhan, the centralized state everywhere has lost a great deal of legitimacy and decentralization is widely believed to promise a range of benefits. Dear students, now I will be talking about decentralization in South Asia. Most countries in South Asia actively pursue physical decentralization. In recent years, there is a push for further decentralization as is reflected in an increased share of subnational spending in overall government expenditure. In some cases, this is driven by political reasons. In Nepal, for example, the new constitution ended a civil war and the federal restructuring was fundamental to sustained peace. In other cases, the main objective is to bring service delivery closer to the citizens. Public service delivery in South Asia remains disappointing. Nearly half of the people still lack access to basic sanitation services, and the region accounts for most of the world's uneducated people. The explanation for the lack of results is often that decentralization has not gone far enough as key decisions are still taken by higher levels of government. The allocation of resources to local governments is unpredictable and few opportunities exist for local governments to raise own revenues. Although these are all critical constraints, they are not a sufficient explanation for South Asia's disappointing performance in service delivery. Sharma in 2014 attributed the poor performance in terms of public service delivery to a combination of two factors. One was strong power relations and second, weak public engagement. India is known for introducing decentralized system of reforms in the year 1993. There is a considerable literature on decentralization in India that has investigated its impact on local development, reduction of poverty, and delivery of essential services such as health and education. India's decentralized system of reforms in 1993 required all the state governments to introduce certain legislative measures to revitalize the local representative institutions. These measures include mandatory elections at the regular intervals, reservation of seats in village panchayats for women and members of scheduled castes and tribes, and substantial devolution of government responsibilities to local authorities. However, the state governments often refrain from transferring power to local level. The experience of decentralization in India to date has been mixed. As states in India differ widely on crucial socioeconomic indicators, the outcomes of decentralization reforms have also varied accordingly. The problems most frequently encountered include the risk of funds failing to arrive from the center, the lack of capacity at subnational levels of the government to take responsibility for public service provision, local governments having very limited scope for decision making, and the potential for local elites to capture a large share of public resources. Dear students, now I will be talking about peace building and economic development through decentralization based on the case study of Jammu and Kashmir. Concepts such as local governance, local capacity and local ownership have become central in the now emerging peace building discourse. There is a substantial literature on the impact of decentralization in promoting peace in post-conflict as well as protracted conflict states. But there has been no clear-cut answer to whether decentralization helps to build and promote peace. Some of these studies argue that decentralization has had a significant, if varied, contribution on community cohesion, reconciliation, and state legitimacy, while others conclude that it has created more conflict than before. Wall's study in 2016 on immediate post-conflict period in Northern Ireland, Sri Lanka, Sierra Leone, and Rwanda found that decentralization strategies have contributed to peace, as these countries were able to introduce inclusive institutions through greater equity in basic local service provision. Jackson's another paper in 2016 focuses on critical review of the literature on local government and decentralization in post-conflict contexts. The paper argues that the success of decentralization is determined by the politics of local government and the political framework in which it operates, including the dynamics of the initial conflict itself. He also notes that local government is most successful when embedded in the local contexts and the nature of the peace agreement itself. Several studies conclude that decentralization can reignite conflict in fragile environments by different groups so as to gain control of the public services, influence electorate results, and consolidate local territorial control. Green's study in 2008 on Uganda argues that decentralization programs have helped to reduce national level conflict but have replaced it with local level conflict. This process has taken place in two ways. First, the concentration of local power at the district level has led to struggles over the district leadership positions. Second, the huge expansion in the number of new districts has led to local level conflict by altering relations between the local ethnic groups. Favored a more context-specific approach that takes into consideration the social, anthropological, and political realities. The erstwhile J&K is the mountainous border state, strategically located and conflict-ridden, situated in the extreme north of India. The erstwhile state has the characteristics of fragile state and has suffered from armed conflict, ethnic tensions, rigged elections, and low economic development, unemployment, and widespread corruption. And it is in this context that a discussion on decentralization in Jammu and Kashmir is relevant to understand its role in building peace, ensuring people's participation at the local level, and in service delivery. Dear students, now I will be discussing about the role of peace building and electoral process in the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. Devolution of power to local governments and their involvement in decision making has been an important part of the larger mainstream political debate in the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir since the late 90s, as the levels of armed conflict came down and the policies of peace building as well as economic development were promoted in the region. Immediately after coming to power, the National Conference promised to conduct panchayat elections, which were eventually conducted in a phased manner in the year 2001. Since 2000, only 3 rounds of elections were held in the erstwhile state, which covered only halka panchayats, and they did not cover elections at the block level as well as at the district level. While the overall voting percentage of panchayat elections have generally remained high, it varied within the different regions of the state. The voting percentages in Kashmir region were low as compared to Jammu as well as Ladakh. Higher turnouts do not necessarily mean democratization, given questions have been raised against the credibility as well as timings of elections. Further, as argued by Rekha Chaudhary in her paper in the year 2001, almost all political processes and political institutions in the valley, they suffer from crisis of legitimacy. Panchayat institutions are perceived as a part of existing structure of power that has no relations to the aspirations as well as choices of the people, and such perceptions have led to an ineffective electoral exercise in Kashmir. Peace building at the local level is deeply influenced by the quality of efforts made at subnational as well as national levels. Since the year 2002, an important feature of J&K state politics that has had a varied impact on decentralization has been the fragile political situation, arising mostly due to 2 factors. Firstly, the regional parties have not been able to form government due to lack of majority, which has led to unstable coalition alliances with the party in power in the center. Secondly, since June 2008, the region has also witnessed resurgence of massive public protests, agitations led by the separatists during the years of 2008, 2009, 2010 and 2016, triggering instability and adversely affecting governance. According to Farhat, these protests are rooted in governance failures and indicate key turns in the conflict dynamics of the region. Because of the fragile political situation in the region, both the Legislative Assembly and Panchayat elections have been delayed. Dear students, now I will be talking about how decentralization of power has a connection to service delivery. Devolution of powers and funds are important aspects of effective decentralization, as without the same, these institutions are bound to fail and prove to be inefficient instruments of development and change. As panchayat elections in the erstwhile state have been limited to halka panchayats and no serious efforts have been made to elect block development councils as well as district planning and development boards, the ministers and MLAs continued to exercise power at those levels. The ministers and MLAs blocked reforms aimed at decentralization of power. Even the allocations were not guided by equity considerations, as it was not guided by an allocation formula. Dear students, now I will be talking about taxation powers and own resource mobilization in the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. The actual amount of taxes, fees, cess that is collected at the local level through panchayats is very negligible and low in comparison to hill states of Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. Commenting on the own resource mobilization of panchayats, the first panchayat budget of Jammu and Kashmir in 2018 states that panchayats have also generated their own resources to the tune of rupees 20 crores in the past few years. This seems to be very low in comparison to other states of India. Dear students, now I will be talking about devolutions from State Finance Commission. The State Finance Commission plays an important role to improve the financial position of the panchayats through fiscal devolution. The official discourse on panchayats in the region completely ignores this important aspect of decentralization. The state government has not evolved an appropriate framework or mechanism for sharing of central transfers as well as state government revenues with the Panchayat Raj institutions. Till that, no state finance commission for panchayats and municipalities has been constituted, and as a result, funds from central as well as state government for Panchayat Raj institutions lack any devolutionary design or principles. Now I will be talking about devolutions from Central Finance Commission. Central Finance Commission also provides grants in aid to duly constituted panchayats and municipalities to support and strengthen the delivery of basic civic services including water supply, sanitation and maintenance of community assets. The erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir has lost bulk of Finance Commission allocations for not having elected panchayats. As per the guidelines of Central Finance Commission, for the release of grants, the disbursal of the funds cannot be recommended for states that have not duly elected panchayats and municipalities. Due to the non-fulfillment of prescribed conditions, the state government could not secure release of more than 80% funds during the period of 2005-2006 to 2009-2010 and 36.23% funds during the period of 2010 to 2015. Similarly, as the term of previous local body had completed in 2016 and fresh elections were only held in November-December 2018, the state has faced financial loss. Basically, funds have lapsed both in the form of basic grant and performance grant for 3 consecutive years 2016, 2017 and 2018. Dear students, now I will be talking about the impact of decentralization on local service delivery. The lapsing of central funds, limited devolutions from the state finances and low own revenue has a negative impact on local governance, as Gram Panchayats are not able to support and strengthen the delivery of basic civic services including water supply, sanitation and maintenance of community assets, maintenance of roads and other services. There is hardly any evidence to claim that service delivery and socio-economic indicators in the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir have improved as a result of decentralized governance. According to Kumar, the panchayats in Jammu and Kashmir during their first term, that's from 2001 to 2006 and even after 2011, have neither funded by the state nor were allowed to raise their own resources and remained visible in relation to few centrally sponsored schemes. The rest of the centrally sponsored schemes, as stated by Chakravarti, are mainly controlled by middlemen and funds for panchayats are mainly utilized by the local legislator. Substantial amounts of funds also remain unutilized due to delays in the formulation of Gram Panchayat development plans. To sum up this lecture, there have been few positives coming out from the case of Jammu and Kashmir, such as high voter turnouts in decentralized elections, which shows that people are keen on change and in the favor of better local governance to address their day-to-day problems. However, reforms aiming at decentralization had limited success overall in the erstwhile state and specifically in Kashmir Valley in terms of peace building and service delivery. The decentralization strategy in the region is driven largely by political motivation and the institution of panchayats has failed to act as instruments of change and development. It is the contention of this lecture that one of the main problems of decentralization and local governance in Jammu and Kashmir has to do with the fact that the important aspects of these processes, such as credibility and timely conduction of panchayat elections, state's commitment to devolution of powers consisting of fund transfers, taxation and expenditure powers of Panchayati Raj institutions have been sidelined and relegated to a position of secondary importance. Chaudhary and Abbott, in their work in 2016, they state that there is a great prospect for women being in the center of peace process. However, PRIs in the region have also failed to address real empowerment and genuine delegation of powers of decisions to women. At present, the PRIs in the region sustain and reinforce the structures of centralization as limited powers and funds have been distributed down the ladder of power hierarchy. Dear students, that was all about decentralization in South Asia. I hope you have understood it well. Thanks for watching it.